Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next installment of our weekly Humanism get-together for San Diego's Humanist Association. This is a wonderful day. Since we've come back from the long hiatus, we have a commitment to getting to know our sister organizations all around Southern California. A couple of months ago, we invited Beverly Zarnow of Kahal Am, San Diego's Humanist Jewish Community. And today we have a special treat. We're going to get to know our fellow humanists, atheists, and agnostics from up north in Los Angeles, from Atheists United. We have Christine Jones, the president, and Evan Clark, the executive director of Atheists United. It's incredibly important to build a stronger community across Southern California, across the United States, and in a global sense for atheists, humanists, agnostics, skeptics, secularists, non-theists. We are a marginalized group, yet we're growing. If we haven't already, we're certainly passing by evangelicals as not only the fastest growing, but the largest religious cohort in the United States. And with being the soon to be, if not already, largest religious cohort in the United States being non-believers and those who are unaffiliated, we have next to no political power. You can't succeed in our society without a semblance of political power. Outside of politics, in terms of when disaster happens, we need community. This year, we've experienced tragedy, we've experienced trauma, and we've noticed the need for community. And thankfully, thanks to Zoom, this has given us a golden opportunity to build a much stronger community. We have community leaders from across the region, from Atheists United, the Santa Clarita Atheists and Freethinkers, the Orange County Humanists. And outside of tragedy, there's also celebration. We have a bigger, broader community, so we can celebrate wonderful things that happen. We can celebrate naturalistic secular holidays like the solstices and equinoxes. We can celebrate people like Charles Darwin and his birthday together. So in both tragedy and happier times, community is an essential part of who we are. We are pro-social animals. Humanism is a pro-social philosophy, and you can't be pro-social alone. So thankfully, we have all of our wonderful sister organizations and the many hundreds of thousands of atheists and humanists who are coming together to make this place a better world. And those of us who have come together today to become friends, build new relationships, and get to know each other. And because of this, we want to get to know the leadership of those groups around us. Because when you lead an organization, it's not just yourself. You're given a great task and a great honor. When you lead an organization, you represent the people in your community, and everything that you do is a reflection of the members of that community. And we have a strong and vibrant community to our north in Atheists United. Evan Clark is a humanist entrepreneur, political consultant, and public speaker. Evan is the founder and creative director of Spectrum Experience LLC and serves as chair of the board of directors for the Secular Student Alliance. Previously, he was the co-host of the Humanist Experience podcast and co-founder of the Humanist Community of Ventura County. As a student leader, Evan was the founder and president of the Secular Student Alliance of California Lutheran University from 2008 to 2011. In 2010, Evan was elected CLU's first openly atheist student body president. Evan was hired in 2019 as Atheists United's first executive director. Everyone, please join me in giving Evan a warm San Diego welcome. Evan, welcome to the Humanist Association of San Diego.
Thank you. Excited to be here. All right. You want me to hop on, take over the screen? I got a short presentation for y'all if you're ready.
Absolutely.
Okay. So since I love talking about myself, I'm going to actually walk through all those titles that we just talked about in my intro. Can y'all see my screen all right? Hopefully that's a thumbs up. And I'm going to actually cover kind of the topic of finding your place in a social movement. And that's how I want to talk about Atheists United today, is where it is in a social movement and where leaders like myself and Christine and others fit in a social movement. I really wish I had a more beautiful academic way of doing this, and I could highlight the careers of heroes of mine like Martin Luther King or A. Philip Randolph or the suffragettes. But instead, I'm just going to talk about myself because I'm an arrogant prick. But no, I think what hopefully will come from this is we can actually touch on some larger ideas about movement building, about the secular movement specifically, and hopefully how you all can find your place in it. So to do that, we're going to start off by talking about where I started off in the secular movement, but I can't do that without defining what on earth this secular movement is. I feel like this is a topic that we sometimes blow past when we're talking about communities like ours or national organizations, and I think we should stop and sit with it for a second. And there's different definitions based on different people you talk to. I looked up the Wikipedia one last night just to feel confident. That's the closest thing we have to a holy book probably in atheism these days. And Wikipedia has a fascinating definition, and it starts off by saying the secular movement refers to a social and political trend in the United States beginning in the early years of the 20th century with the founding of the American Association for the Advancement of Atheism in 1925 and the American Humanist Association in 1941, in which atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, free thinkers, and other non-religious and non-theistic Americans have grown in both numbers and visibility. Now, this is a fascinating concept. I mean, you've probably all heard of social movements before. You can think of things like feminist movements or the LGBT movement or again, I don't know why I'm just drawing blanks, but there's been tons of social movements throughout history, and there will continue to be tons of social movements, labor movements. But what's fascinating to think about ours is what is this modern conglomeration of national, local, international organizations that seem to work together, that have similar-ish mission statements, and that represent a similar-ish block of people around the country and around the world, that organizations like the Humanist Association of San Diego, American Atheists, our national affiliates, our local meetups, all probably function within. Why are we a movement? My only critique of this definition probably is I think it probably starts a little bit earlier. We could get into technicalities if we were scholars about whether it's when we started to use terms like atheist more aggressively, when demographics started to change more aggressively. I personally would argue maybe the founding of the New York Society of Ethical Culture in 1876 was one of the preeminent starting points of what we would consider the modern secular movement. And there's fights over if we should call this a secular movement or a free thought movement or an atheist movement or a humanist movement, which I think I could talk about later if we really wanted to get into the details of that. But for me and most modern organizers, people who have been leading organizations in this space for probably the last 15 years or so, we're starting to come together around this term secular movement to define a group of people that unify for religious freedom, pluralism, absolute separation of religion and government, for secular science-based healthcare, secular science-based education, secular science-based charity. We fight for equity regardless of gender, sexual orientation, reproductive status, religion, race, ethnicity, or disability. And you'll also notice if you look at our history, we're a community that's often the first victims of religious nationalism, of religious discrimination, of religious privilege. Many in our community are still afraid to publicly identify with their secular identity because of fear of retaliation, fear of hate, fear of discrimination. I mean, just yesterday, just this Thursday, actually, a new person just moved to Los Angeles wanting to join our community, and he would not let me take his photo at our public event for fear of how that could hurt his career. And that's why many of the issues over the past 100 years have been in that we have organized and mobilized around under this broad umbrella I am going to call the secular movement, have been in direct reaction to religious oppression. We've been the canary in the coal mines, sounding the alarm for society, doing our best to organize safe communities for each other, and a resistance movement needed to fight back against a terrible status quo where religion is privileged and prioritized at the expense and harm of those that don't identify with that majority religious identity. But why we are a growing movement and why we are an influential movement today is probably because you can think of all of the organizations and institutions that make it up. And this is what's fascinating to me, how a movement goes from a bunch of people hanging out saying, God, there's something wrong in society, we really should change it. Or, oh, we all share an identity and that identity is being marginalized and we should work together to fight. To the place where, when you look at movements like the LGBT movement, they have $1 million, $100 million in some cases, organizations. You have international media campaigns. You have communities in every city in the country. You have institutions that serve youth, that serve veterans, that serve the elderly, that serve those in specific job situations, specific racial identities. The amount of diversity in that movement has become institutionalized, the support for those people. And if we look at the secular movement, we have some national organizations many of you have probably heard of. We have American Atheists and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We have American Humanist Association and Center for Inquiry, American Ethical Society, among others. Then we have more specialized organizations. We have organizations that got started in the past 20 to 50 years that decided there are more specific needs based on specific sub-identities. So there's the Secular Student Alliance for high school and college students. We have Camp Quest for summer camps for youth. We have Recovering from Religion for people specifically stage of life where they need support after they've left a religious institution or tradition. We have Foundation Beyond Belief, which focuses on secular charity and service, a military association of free thinkers, of atheists and free thinkers for veterans and active military people. We even have cultural and racial and ethnic focus groups that recognize the specific traditions and experiences that come from those, such as Hispanic American freethinkers, Black non-believers, secular women, ex-Muslims of North America, and the Society for Humanistic Judaism. We have international partners. I'm not going to do this list forever, I promise, but I'm just going to go over a few more. We have international partners like Humanist International, Atheist Republic, International Association of Atheists, Humanist Global Charity and Peace, Atheist Alliance International. And then, of course, I think is the back is your local organizations. And that's going to be groups like American Atheists, American Humanist Association of San Diego, Santa Barbara Humanists, Inland Empire, Atheist Agnostics and Humanists, Sunday Assembly. These are the organizations where most of us gather quite regularly. Most of us have our friends and family. And it's fascinating to think about a movement in that sense. And scholars are still figuring out how to study and understand a movement. It's very, very young. To think that just in the 90s, there was 1/3 as many people under 30 as identifying as if religiously unaffiliated as today. Said another way, we have tripled in size people who identify as religiously unidentified in the past 20 to 30 years. We have exponentially grown. We've become the fastest growing religious identity in America, and we're going to be one of the largest religious identities in America's future. And so, will there be people that represent them? Will people organize and fight for them? And how will we uniquely support them? That's what a secular movement is in my mind. And I hope by the end of this talk, I inspire you to think about how you can interact with a secular movement and how organizations like Humanist Association of San Diego and Atheists United can be a place you could do that. So first, I want to talk about how I joined this movement. And weirdly enough, it happened at California Lutheran University. So I grew up atheist. By first grade, I went to Catholic school and very quickly decided this God belief is not my thing. Science is where I want to hang out. I kicked and screamed, and my parents finally let me move to the public school. But something fun happened at Cal Lutheran, which is the university. I knew I wanted to go to school in Southern California. My family had enough access to resources to where I could do that. And I found this small little liberal arts school in Southern California and fell in love with it. I found out it wasn't too religious for me to go there. And I got in 2007. That was my freshman year at Cal Lutheran. But if you think about the politics of the world at that time, there was two major things happening in California. One, we had a presidential election coming for 2008. So you'll remember Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are in a primary in 2007 going into 2008. You have John McCain winds up being the candidate that Obama runs again. But specifically in California, we had a ballot initiative called Proposition 8. This was the ballot initiative that was going to remove gay marriage's status. It had become legal status in California, and this was a ballot initiative to remove that, that right from the gay community. And so I joined the Gay Straight Alliance my freshman year in college and started organizing on campus and off campus to fight this new ballot initiative. And what was fascinating is as I got more involved with the group, and the more we started to protest on the streets as the election got closer, the more we started to feel empowered about what we were doing, the more I also realized everyone around me was pissed at the same thing: religion. Religion was the only argument being made for why the gay community couldn't marry. It was completely religious arguments that they were organizing around. And so I finally, after a 2-hour protest we did on the streets outside of campus, I asked everyone, are any of you religious? And one by one, we went around this table of about 12 people. And first one said, no, I don't believe in God. The second one said, yeah, I'm probably an agnostic. I'm not sure. The second one said, I have no idea, but my parents grew up Catholic. The next one said, oh no, I'm a hard atheist. And what was fascinating is 90% of the people in the room didn't identify as religious. And so I finally asked, would there be any value if we had a club or a group that specifically focused on you, that had a place for us to discuss and talk about what it means to be non-religious or atheist or agnostic in our campus, in our society? And everyone was really excited by it. So I founded the Secular Student Alliance at California Lutheran University. I didn't realize it at the time, but we were the only religious club on a college, we were the only atheist club on a religious campus in the country at the time. And what surprised me most is why it was most successful. It was really successful not because a bunch of people like me joined, who had been atheists since first grade, who discovered the word in 6th grade and proudly told their parents, I'm an atheist. No. It was popular because of all my friends who were still a little bit religious, who were questioning for the first time. They had never found a safe space to gather and discuss their beliefs before. They had roommates who were conservative and religious that they couldn't talk about this stuff with. They had parents who were hyper-religious and had expectations for them. Some of them had religious scholarships because Cal Lutheran had a matching grant where if your church gave you money to go to college, the school would match it. They didn't want to lose their scholarship by outing themselves as anything other than the Christianity that they grew up in. And what's fascinating is this led to a really incredible growth period for me. That's me. That's young Evan organizing with the Secular Student Alliance at Cal Lutheran in probably 2011. And we became really, really active. We became one of the most active groups on campus, actually. The tour guides used to talk about us as the diversity on campus. We had become so big and so active. And yeah, we mostly started with discussion groups. We'd meet for 2 hours once a week. I got to hone my skills as a facilitator. I got a crash course in religion and philosophy that I only would have dreamed of that I'd gotten in high school or college classes. And we even grew to start doing field trips. For those of you in San Diego, you'll recognize this. This is the Mormon Temple in La Jolla. We raised money and did a weekend field trip in San Diego. We visited the Mormon Temple. We visited the Creation Museum. We visited a pagan festival, and we went to a mega church all in one weekend. We called these interfaith adventures, and we, like budding anthropologists, started to attend different religious community groups and ultimately came back and found better language for how we talked about our beliefs and our rituals and thought about our futures and communities. And funny enough, I even had the opportunity to host a Secular Student Alliance conference at Cal Lutheran. And this is when I met my first leaders outside of campus. I met Paul Schmier, who was a local leader who pledged $50 a month as pizza money to our group because he loved what we were doing. I met August Brunsman, who was running the National Secular Student Alliance, and I met Daryl Ray, who had founded Recovering from Religion, because he came and visited and spoke to us. I met Dan Barker, who's one of the heads of Freedom from Religion Foundation. I suddenly was connected to this larger world, this secular movement, because I'd started a group on a little campus in Southern California. And also unintentionally, I honed a ton of skills and confidence. And so I ran for student body president at Cal Lutheran. And to your shock and mine, I won. I had become the most well-known atheist on campus and continued that as student body president of the university. Now, what's really fun is that also really got the larger social movement to notice a little bit. So the National Secular Student Alliance started putting me on their flyers and promotional materials. Again, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was their first student leader who had become a student body president. And they really loved it because I happened to do it at a religious university. But I was recruited by them to join their board of directors. And on their board of directors is where I really got to dive into what I consider the movement now. Within a year, I became the chair of the board of directors and started to attend national gatherings. This is a national gathering from probably 5 or 6 years ago in Washington, D.C., organized by the Secular Coalition for America. I got to meet all of the other national organizations. I got to interact with the donors that make those organizations work. I got to meet the founders of some of them, the new hires of some of these. I got to see where our weaknesses were, and I got to engage with the new language we were trying out. See, social movements are funny. They're not stable things. I'm always fascinated and love the people that are new to the movement, who always want to conglomerate all the organizations together, who don't respect and understand the history of that movement and think there's one answer to solve it all. In reality, social movements are messy, they're chaotic, and they're beautiful because of that. There is different organizations because there are different needs. There are experiments that need to happen. There are failures that need to happen. We are a child trying to grow up. We are not going to get everything perfect. And I got a crash course in this a little bit. I also got to start attending national events in DC, like the Interfaith Youth Corps event in partnership with President Obama's cabinet and the education secretary. I got to attend California Free Thought Day in Sacramento. And so at a very young age, I'm one of the few secular leaders who came from the secular student movement and got to dive headfirst into this movement and its leadership. What I learned quickly was there's so much space for growth here. And specifically, I wanted to focus back at home. After my experience in college, I desperately wanted to recreate the community I had on campus. And so I called up Paul Schmier, who sent us our pizza money. And I said, Paul, I think you and I can build a humanist community in Ventura County. And this was an incredible experience. We launched a group from scratch. We decided that we needed to do something unique. We thought that the area needed more of a focus on friendly, caring secular community, not just intellectual and antagonistic. We thought we could organize around service and curiosity and support for one another, and that we could build a thriving community. And within 2 years, we were hosting 8 events a month, had a very age diverse group of people, and even had built up connections with the university, Cal Lutheran, and we're getting people who were graduating to join our group. This was my first attempt at trying to do local activism off campus. I also started attending the Secular Student Alliance's national conferences. Now as a leader there, I got to meet some of the speakers and leaders across our movement. I got to meet Sarah Blaine, who's the first state level lobbyist in America. And that led to a call I got in 2015 to join the only atheist congressional campaign in the country in Arizona. So what's funny about social movements is the longer you're in them, the more you notice the holes that we're missing, the areas that we're not investing time and resources in. And Sarah targeted one of those. Sarah Blaine, who had started the Secular Coalition for Arizona, become their first atheist out there, had helped people like Juan Mendez become the only open atheist in a state legislature anywhere in the country, recognized there were not enough atheists running for office, and specifically doing it publicly and doing it proudly. And so she worked with her friend James Woods, who's this guy here with the cane, who happens to be blind, to run for Congress in a wildly conservative district. He has no shot of winning this race, but to run as an open and proud atheist. And she recruited myself and JP Martin here, who's on the left, to be the campaign team for this long shot congressional race. And we did. We went viral a few times. We focused on atheism. We inspired other people locally to talk about their atheism. We brought new volunteers into the political process by talking about atheism. And we brought in new money that had never been brought into the political process because of that. And so I got a crash course in graphic design. I got a crash course in PR. I got a crash course in politics. And again, I didn't realize it at the time, but there's no real experts in humanism in politics. I had kind of put myself in one of the holes of our movement and made myself valuable in that new space, which led to Sarah and I founding the first humanist political consulting firm. We focus more on political consulting, but we decided, you know what we need is more professionals working on communications and PR in this space. And this has been a wild ride. Our first client, funny enough, was American Humanist Association. We got to rebrand International Darwin Day. You've seen the logo they use. That was us. We designed that. And we worked on new messaging for them to talk more about Darwin's youth rather than the way we always talk about old man Darwin and his mind. Let's talk about the curiosity and adventure focused Darwin that hopped on a boat and didn't know how long he'd be out there. And this led to quite a few years of really exciting work. We've now worked with about 75 clients across the country, lots of school board candidates, congressional candidates, city council candidates. We've worked with nonprofits, advocacy organizations, lobbyist groups. And what we're really trying to do deep down, even though, yes, we do most of the PR services anyone does, is instill our values into communication, is hone our skills as professional public relations people and bring that back to the movement that so desperately needs it. And after our first year of doing that, though, we also found another hole in the movement. We recognized there's not enough high quality storytelling media in our space. So if any of you like podcasts and are really intense atheists, you've probably found things like The Atheist Experience by Matt Dillahunty or The Thinking Atheist by Seth Andrews. There is high quality content out there, but that's so often focused on the intellectual side of atheism. And one of the critiques Sarah and I started to have of the secular movement was how we always talked about our thinking and our experience and our growth in only rational terms. And we forget the idea that persuasion takes much more than logic. To persuade someone to change their mind, you have to connect with them emotionally and you have to help them grow emotionally. You have to use things like storytelling and empathy. And so we came up with the Humanist Experience. I like this picture much more. I think we're much more happy casual living out of a car. So we decided to drop everything and put everything we owned into a car, and we traveled the country for 6 months hosting a radical podcast concept called the Humanist Experience. I'm literally going to pull the language off our website because I think that's the best way to describe it. We seek out radical experiences that educate our emotions and expand our world. Our commitment to social change motivates us to look for ways to effectively connect people to contemporary issues and then persuade them to become change makers. The Humanist Experience uses experiential learning and storytelling to do that. We see story, context, and experience as crucial tools for real understanding. Our podcast uses these tools to provide insights and inspiration for engaging positively in the world around us. We wanted it to be a call to action to use your empathy and your experience to get more involved. And we decided to go full out on this. So we did everything from, sleeping outside of ruins of a town that had been burnt down by a forest fire, by a wildfire, to talk about climate change, to going to a nudist retreat to talk about body positivity and change, which is where this photo's from. We visited a military base in San Antonio to talk about atheists in foxholes and their experience. And we spoke with leaders in the disability movement about the barriers to running for office that comes from just that identity. We put ourselves in extremely vulnerable situations so we could learn, understand, share, and inspire others. And I learned a ton about storytelling. I learned a ton about how to communicate more effectively, and ultimately learned a lot more about media and how that's a huge hole we need to fill if we want to be a successful movement. That's just us traveling the country in New Mexico, and that's her kicking my ass. So, and that all led to a few years later getting involved with Atheists United. So Atheists United, I have known about since I founded my group at California Lutheran University. Bobby Kirkhart, who was president of the group in the early 2000s, became a friend of mine after she spoke to our group. She came to Cal Lutheran and spoke back in 2009 or so. And this had always been seen to me as this big, awesome, well-organized, movement-structured and focused group in Los Angeles. And I was really sad to hear when I was doing a road trip through California in 2018 that they were having real struggles, essentially. Their events had seen crashing attendance. Their membership was becoming less and less diverse, and they were having trouble getting new events and professional programming off the ground at the scale that they had wanted. But something really wonderful also happened, which movements need. They need money. And somebody passed, they died, and gave them a big chunk of money. And like a lot of nonprofits, they were very excited about how to invest in themselves. And I was one of the advisors, you could argue, that was telling them you should hire some young idiot kid. You should pay them very little, but tell them they have to fundraise their own salary to keep their job. And that you should really try to reshape your organization to match the modern movement and the diversity of people that represents and the diversity of programming that come with it. And this was a huge risk for an organization like Atheists United. Atheists United was founded in 1982. It was a member and participant in American atheist organizing going back to 1977 and broke off, became its own official local nonprofit in 1982, and has evolved with the atheist movement in many ways since then. But like all organizations, strong leadership, formal structures that are beneficial to you, fresh programming and language are very hard things to come by and can transition very quickly from era to era. I'm so impressed that, frankly, Atheists United is still in existence in a lot of ways, being an all-volunteer organization. And while they have made it this far, there are many organizations that didn't. We have Humanists of Los Angeles. We have Ethical Culture Society of Los Angeles that have not made it over the 30 or 40 years that we've been in existence. And we now get this chance because of that donation to, frankly, start over a bit. And that's what I've done. Like many of my projects, I'm probably a starter more than anything. I'm the founder type. And we went back to the drawing board and looked at how we can make Atheists United function more like a startup than an institution that's been around forever. And for the past 2 years, we've been completely revamping everything we do while celebrating the things we do really well. Things we do really well is we've built a meetup network of over 20 groups across Southern California. We host over 150 events a year right now as an organization, and we're only looking to expand that. We're building out resources to support those meetup groups. But beyond that, we're now trying to expand into new programming. We're looking for where young people not of European backgrounds and who don't speak about atheism as those in the 80s did, are gathering and what they're gathering around. We're looking at new social programming, we're looking at new political programming, and we're looking at new ways to support the needs that we have as human beings that frankly people only find in churches or very tight communes right now. Recovering from religion is a human need and needs to be addressed. Raising children is a human need that should not be done alone. Dealing with death, dealing with trauma and tragedy, dealing with a pandemic, these are things we have to do together. And we're hoping our programming can be there for people through those times. And continuing this trend of just starting stuff, this past year, I also have been involved in an awesome group of people that just got off the ground, the new Southern California Secular Coalition. This is the probably freshest and most undefined group I'm a part of right now, but maybe has the most potential. There's a coalition of over 20 groups around Southern California that are collaborating constantly, trying to improve each other's professionalism and programming, that are finding language we can collaborate on and expanding our network for support. And so when I look back at all this nutty stuff I've done, I look at this secular movement. I see this giant thing that cares for all of these focus areas, and I agree and support almost all of it. I also have my own passions and dreams and interests that mostly overlap with this organization. And what I think has been successful for me, and I hope others look to try to figure out to do, is find where you overlap most and where you bring special expertise, like where this red dot might be, something that maybe the movement doesn't have, but you have figured out, and bring that to the movement. We need to be thinking that movements are built up of organizers and intellectuals, thought leaders and investors. Investors are different types of investors. We have angel investors, institutional investors, we have movement investors. Maybe you spread out your money. We need connectors, we need professionals, we need institutions, new institutions, we need followers, we need foot soldiers, we need media personalities, we need artists, we need technicians, we need specialists like students and veterans and Latinos and those with transgender identity. And then, you have people like me who really can't go a few years without starting something new. I've noticed when I look at this now, I could break this up into kind of 2 6-year periods. I've done about 4 different things every 6 years. And this first 6 years was me finding my footing, finding my skills, upgrading where I could, and exploring our movement in general. The last 6 years have been trying to hone professional skills and take things to the next level, trying to broaden the communities I'm a part of and make impact in places that haven't seen impact before. And so I'm an entrepreneurial humanist. Of our movement, I had a friend who taught me a while back that when you look at the religious right and their movement, they have entrepreneurs. And I finally had a word for the type of work I do. And I want you to try to think about what your role is in a movement. And so while I'm trying to bring my entrepreneurial humanism and secularism to Atheists United these days, and have been working with the Secular Student Alliance on that same goal, if I had a moral of this story, it's that there is a place for you in our secular movement. Atheists United and Humanist Association of San Diego are places you can put those skills. And while I need to recognize that I am a privileged, straight, cisgender, white male from a decently rich family to where I can take the entrepreneurial risks I have, and I have a cushion and a safety net that others don't. There are skills you bring, and there are needs we have as a movement that can come together if you join us. So I hope you become a part of one of our organizations. I hope we can work together. I would love to tell you more about Atheists United and Secular Student Alliance, but thank you for letting me talk about myself for a while.
All right, everyone, please give Evan a warm round of applause. Unmute yourselves.
Thank you, Evan.
All right. Do we have any questions for Evan?
I have one. Evan, I'm most interested in trying to bridge the gap between conservatives and liberals. And oftentimes there's a religious component to that. And it's really difficult because we've become so polarized. And I tend to speak ill of the religious. So I have a hard time talking to them without offending them. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what is being done and what could be done in that realm.
It's a good question. Well, and if your superpower is not diplomacy, then don't beat yourself up trying to be a diplomat. I definitely think there are other people that will take on that role, and there are ways to support them, whether that be financially or to volunteer. Not everyone has to do everything, and there are ways to support that without forcing yourself to be that person. So I've found that I can be a diplomat in spaces like interfaith that others can't. Having gone to Cal Lutheran and having done all of the interfaith work that I've done over the years, it's quite natural for me to sit in religious spaces and be the proud atheist, and I don't piss them off too much and they don't piss me off too much. For whatever reason, I make that work a little bit better than a lot of my friends. But I have a lot of friends that care about that, but just it's not their place to be in the room. So think about where your place is. But it's a good question. So I do think there's some organizations that are focused more on supporting those specific areas. So there's even new organizations that if we had to draw 100 Venn diagrams and I could show you where they are, they don't overlap almost at all with me. But there is organizations like, I think Atheists for Liberty that got started. That's more like libertarian and conservative focused, especially around economics and a few social issues. And you have, I think, Republican Atheists founded by a woman who, again, I don't find that friendly and don't really want to work with, but if that is a possible partner organization for you in that goal, that could be. I think I've found that coalition building at large has been really successful, and I've started to see the national organizations get better and better at over the past few years. So there's kind of a chicken and the egg problem when you're a small movement. So when you want to be taken seriously by, let's say, a really reputable organization or another movement, let's take the LGBT organizations or some of the other groups who have worked in First Amendment and separation of church and state work in the United States for hundreds of years. They want you to be as professional as they are. And in some cases, they want you to bring a lot of members and power with you. Otherwise, are you worth their time? They have other people they can work with. So American Atheists and American Humanist Association and Freedom from Religion Foundation have scaled wildly in the past 10 to 15 years. They tripled the amount of staff they have, their resources and programming have grown. And that's led to much stronger relationships and partnerships with other national partners. So American Atheists, even during the most recent Supreme Court hearings, had good partners with other messaging and national organizations, and they were able to work in coalition with them against, a tense theocrat being added to our Supreme Court. When it comes to crossing political divides, I think this might be a huge need area right now. Similar to religious identities that aren't as explicitly secular and atheist, there's a huge need area. I don't see any organizations specifically helping people that are questioning, seeking, spiritual but not religious. Like, this could be a need area that someone could focus on from a movement perspective, where you might overlap with the secular movement 20% of the time, but really it's kind of its own focus. So I don't have a good answer for you. Locally, our memberships are very polarized. We have found that our values are so disaligned with the religious right of today that there's not much to discuss. You know, when the opposition is discussing whether you should be a part of their country or not, and we're debating, you know, how specific the Constitution should be, we can't talk to each other using the same language. There's no negotiating when they don't think you should be alive in some cases. So I don't find it very valuable to negotiate with what I think are terroristic type beliefs. But I do think there are places for maybe deep canvassing. You know, interfaith is a space that probably I interact with the most diversity of political opinion. So outside of interfaith, though, I'm struggling to give a good answer for you. Maybe this is a need area for a movement, and this could be partners of many of our communities. Yeah, Dave in Orange County is doing great work working with organizations like United Nations, which will broaden our base and speak to more politically diverse communities. I do think getting involved locally, especially in your local politics, will do a lot. But we have become so polarized that our issues in our community now are part of the polarization. Whether we are a religious or secular country is the fight we're having, and I don't think we're going to compromise, nor should we.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
I have a comment. I really liked your presentation. I like the way you have evolved, and you're still evolving. You're looking for better ways of doing things and getting a better coalition. And it's the way you're thinking. You're thinking like a atheist, or thinking like gay people, or whatever. But there is another way of thinking. It's called mathematical thinking or scientific thinking. And the goal, because I didn't hear you mention the libertarians that want to have a goal of having more liberty for the individual, that but the individual has to be controlled. And how to get a society, you have the maximum amount of freedom, you know, you're still controlled because you can't have individuals doing what they want to do. But the libertarians are going for that, and overall people can want liberty. And so that can be an overall goal. How do you develop, you have the maximum amount of freedom in a society? And that's the thing in the future. This
is a great question. And I don't want to get too far off from the topic we're discussing, which I think is movements and movement organizations. So I would like us to focus more on how our organizations can focus on those questions. But I do think we have some convoluted ideas of freedom that are currently running rampant in the Libertarian Party that are negatively hurting our communities and our identity. So one idea is school vouchers, which has become very common in libertarian organizing, and it's used to justify the parents' freedom to choose what happens with the child's education. But what is ignored is the child's freedom to get a secular education if they want it. And so we have a difference of opinion about what freedom is most important in that case. And so the secular community has come out very strong over the past 50 years, arguing that the child's right to a secular education is what we want to prioritize over the parents' most often religious beliefs. And that clash of freedom, there's no easy answer to it. These are very common. Reproductive rights is often discussed in similar terms. And we have to use things maybe other than freedom language to answer that questions. And so our communities actually have to organize maybe more around values, and we have to have ethical tools that we use to answer those questions that are more robust than I think what we were able to use in the 1980s, when it was just creationism versus evolution, and it was just atheists being free in society. So I'm excited to dive into those questions in the future, but as of right now, the questions of whether an atheist child should be forced to go to a place based on their parents' concept of freedom, I know where I stand on that one.
Okay, comment?
No,
comment,
let's do
please.
someone else. I don't like, let's keep doing questions just for
Yes,
the question's sake, and then we'll swing back.
All right,
Okay.
so here's a question in terms of the fact that you're working with a more established community organization like Atheists United, but also you have an involvement in Secular Student Alliance. So
Yes.
when we're looking at different generations of atheists and secular individuals, what have you noticed about the focuses and desires of older people, middle-aged people, and younger people? And not only what have you noticed about, if there is a different focus, what it is, the different goals of these particular groups?
And this is why I think framing this in movement discussion is probably the most valuable way to do it. So when you are like me and you're back in college and you're in your 20s and you're just so excited about changing the world, and you start testing this language about atheism and humanism, and you start watching your first YouTube videos of these speakers or reading your first books, you forget and don't recognize yet that there is a movement with this history that has fought, and in some cases people have died, to like create this space, to create this language, to create these organizations that you now can so easily hop in and out of. You know, the Secular Student Alliance was founded in 2001, 2000, and it broke off from another national organization. And it broke off specifically because they were recognizing that secular students, that the non-religious students on campus were not getting the focused attention they need. They had specific needs and programs and communication and service that could help them that wasn't being served by organizations that put most of their money into media or lawyers or lobbyists. And so, or, you know, adults and seniors. So we find that as movements essentially discover themselves and grow, they evolve a lot. And so I feel like I'm part of what I call the secular student generation. I'm from a group of people who were that first round of kind of like established secular student groups who had all of the support because the Secular Student Alliance was finally like hitting its stride as an organization. I got to connect with other student leaders around the country in ways that wasn't possible even 5 years before I got involved. And then also I noticed once I joined this larger world, I started an off-campus group and I got involved nationally, that I was using slightly different language. The people I followed and looked up to in the movement were people who had become popular in the past 5 to 10 years. Where like if you had joined this movement in the 80s, the people you followed were popular in the 70s and 80s. But this is natural. This is a feature, not a bug of a movement. This is how we evolve. We take the language of the past, we compare it and clash it with the language of today, and we hopefully come out with better language for tomorrow. And equally, we think about finding more professionals. Well, I'm the first generation of students because of the work the Secular Student Alliance did. You know, when you think about organizations that can have exponential potential, by planting the Secular Student Alliance 20 years ago, leaders like me now think this is a place I can work. It's a place that I can actually make an impact in the world, where I think normally I would have tried to go be a part of the LGBT movement or be a part of an economic focus group or a political party. So I think we're in an awesome evolution point where groups like the Secular Student Alliance and Camp Quest have hit their stride, are producing a new group of leaders who are finding access to new media. I came into this movement when blogs became really popular. You know, Hemant Mehta was the leader I followed, not Madeline Marie O'Hare. And we've evolved our language a lot since then. And it will. I can't wait for the day that I'm the old guy using secular language, like secular movement or whatever, and it's all evolved to something cool and new and hip. And But more specifically to what you said, I do believe there's also been a big cultural shift in what we define as atheist issues or humanist issues. So a lot of our community organized in the 80s and 90s as a resistance movement, mostly, not completely, but mostly to the rising religious right. And that is absolutely what they should have done given the resources they had. They saw the writing on the wall that something traumatic was happening in society. We didn't have anything that we could really do with our low resources to fight against it. So we created tight communities where we could support each other, and where we could, we fought back against this dangerous religious ideas that we were seeing in society. But it's been a few years and we have a lot more resources now. And so to me, we're moving into a new era where we can talk about influencing with our positive values, not just our reactionary values, an impact on society. We can think about maybe not just how we fight back against religious privilege, but how we raise atheist kids. We can fight back instead of just fighting back. We still have to fight back against these people. Instead of just fighting back against separation of church and state, we can be talking about how we build a more ethical society for young people, for people of color. And what we bring to that is a secular worldview, a secular model for thinking. You know, I use humanist language personally, and I think that's really exciting. And we find that students on college campuses are having these conversations. We're finding that they're organizing around issues like Black Lives Matter, like climate change, like feminism, in ways that, we just didn't institutionally see in our movement very often in the past.
All right, other questions?
I've got one. Evan.
Yeah.
Have you found that there's a combative or resistive attitude projected at various secular groups that are not yet accepted as mainstream? And if you found this, how do you fight back and open a mutual understanding with respectful dialogue, respectful interaction?
Can you be a little bit more specific what you mean by these outsider orgs?
When I say outside or various secular groups, all the different groups we're talking about, but then combative, resistive from mainstream organizations that have already established themselves, whether it's religious institutions, whether it's current modern civil rights organizations, whatever, but that are resistive because we're new kids on the block, so to speak.
So Anthony Pinn speaks incredibly about this topic, and I think we have a lot to learn from it. And one of his most critical ideas is that we shouldn't ask to be just partners and assimilate. We should stop sucking up to all of these organizations and trying to be their friends, and we should demand respect. We should get really, really, really good at what we're good at. We should bring together our group of people in ways that they could never dream of and be powerful in that way. So what we find is that a lot of social movements didn't gain power by trying to be like everyone else that was in power and washing away their differences. They actually gained power by leaning into the things that bring them pride and differentiates them. And I think we have a ton of potential to do that. I think, usually social movements have their own language. I don't know about you, but if you go in between like a religious church on a Sunday and then a meeting like this, we use different language. I think we should lean into that. We are creating our own words for concepts that were only ever described in religious ways in the past. That's good. That's exciting. We are challenging media. We are challenging the legal system. And we're sometimes doing it alone. While I do think we want and need partners in certain places, especially when it comes to like Supreme Court cases, there are many ways actually that we can very pridefully organize. And what will happen, and I can guarantee it because it's already happened to a lot of our organizations, is people will start to pay attention because we're doing something special. We're doing what they're trying to do. And they recognize that we're the ones uniquely good at it. So I think personally, we should own that. I know occasionally people join our movement and they're very excited for us to like drop some of the labels we've used in the past and water down some of the intensity. Well, then maybe you're a diplomat that we send to go talk to people that are polarizing. But for the long-term success of the movement, it's often found that the more radical and different you are, sometimes the more respect you get, which is to me what's more exciting. Yeah, so respect. I forget the other term he used for when you kind of like assimilate rather than define your own. He speaks about like hip hop and how hip hop became a movement, and it's really cool talk. I encourage everyone to check it out.
Well, that's kind of a nice segue into, if we want to have respect, and if we want to be able to even open other groups to some kind of dialogue with the secular community, our own communities need to be strong, and there have to be strong networks and a sense of purpose to our communities, to where we're doing something for the greater good of society. So I think that that's very important, that we start with building our own neighborhoods, our own cities, our own counties, our own, and having a very strong and productive movement that actually influences society for the good.
And to jump off that point, there's a really good branding argument for why we should get more specific rather than more broad in what we're doing. So essentially, there's an argument that's made sometimes that if we are more broad, or if we get too specific or too controversial with what we're talking about, we'll lose some members. And we're often talking about that like 1 to 10% of members that are probably on the periphery of our group right now. And what often happens is by prioritizing that 1 to 10% on the periphery, we're actually doing less valuable programming for the 90% of people that really agree and really want more of that more specific thing. And so what I think happens is, and again, this comes a little bit out of, which is completely makes sense, a culture of us being very marginalized and very small groups back when we were getting off the ground in the 60s and 70s and 80s. What happens is we are such a wide umbrella that you sometimes don't stand for much. And you could have had 10 times as many people like the 90% that agreed, but instead you prioritized the 1 to 10% of people that were like the only people who found controversy in it. And we've had this a lot. I mean, if you go far enough back, there were debates about whether we should partner with the gay rights movement or not in some of our groups. And some of our groups didn't participate in supporting the gay community because they were worried about losing a few of their more conservative or libertarian members. Well, if you looked at studies, we didn't have good studies at the time, but if you look at studies today, like our community is so overwhelmingly in support of issues like that. What we need to do is better serve our core members and be more specific. And I think we'll actually grow much quicker and be more valuable than being a broad, almost meaningless umbrella that serves very few. I'd rather serve a bunch very intensely rather than like this huge endless umbrella, but with almost nothing of value. A few more intensely.
Yeah, and I think we also have to have a finger to the wind as to where we're headed as a society, what the values of a future society that is better, what those values are going to look like. So there has to be some sort of a visionary effort involved, and just a sensitivity to where we are headed as a society that is flourishing and is more equitable.
And that debate is good. It is a feature, not a bug. From a humanist or secular worldview, we update based on new information, right? Like we can't rely on appeals to tradition for how to answer today's questions. And so when new ideas and new language and movements come along, we have to interact with them, and we have to figure out if we should and how. So yeah, like Black Lives Matter is a very new social movement within a larger civil rights movement. But we have to have the discussion. I know there are people that will debate how much we should work with them or not, or what place they have in relation to a secular movement. But the debate is a feature, not a bug. It is part of our worldview to have that conversation. And while I don't know exactly where our movement organizations will fall on all of those conversations, I actually want to say it is a good thing we're having them. I know it feels like we've had splits in our movement over issues like feminism and social justice and skepticism. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's us evolving based on our worldview.
So where's the place of conservative and libertarian atheists in our movement?
It's a good question. And I do think this is a little bit of question about movements that I didn't get to go into, which is like there are sub-movements within movements. So I'm using secular as probably the biggest catch-all right now, where there are much more specific focused movements. So traditionally, the humanist movement has been much more progressive politically and very focused on causes that we would call social justice today, in ways that the atheist movement, if I had to be more specific, is very like focused on atheist equity, atheist identity, and removing religion from power. But beyond that, it's not looking to necessarily engage itself in a ton of social issues the way the humanist movement has since its founding, but they overlap maybe in a secular movement. So again, if we want to get into micro movements, like it's really gray and fuzzy, and there's lots of overlapping Venn diagrams, but I think this is a question that probably will organically be answered, but I imagine there will be more organizations that identify as more conservative economically or politically that will use secular, atheist, humanist identity and organize and then try to say they have overlap with our movements. And I imagine any secular conservative organization that got started today would have overlap with us over equity of atheist beliefs, over removing religion from power. But the way I've seen most current humanist and atheist organizations structured, that's where it would end. Most of our organizations and our members, at least, are pretty excited to talk about economic and social issues beyond that, and the values that our organizations have organized around conflict a lot. So yeah, I could totally see conservative secular movement, but I won't be a part of it.
Next
And
question.
it also makes a lot of sense. For most of care of what we have political discussions, what are people interested in discussing that affects all of our futures? And I think these discussions are really a mandate for all organizations, not just atheist or secular organizations, but we should all be engaging in the discussions that affect essentially the lives of everybody on this planet as we speak.
And this is a conscious movement choice that often happens in organizations, whether you prioritize identity or values or something else. And Atheists United has been going through that for the past 30 years. We've been subtly shifting from conversations almost exclusively about identity and relation of our identity to other identities to values and beliefs. So, and this is a hard transition, and not all organizations will do it. But at least for us, we've learned that our membership cares much more about the values that come from their atheism and want to organize around that as well, than just atheist identity and then stopping. And we think that'll probably give us much more longevity as demographics hopefully continue and atheist identity isn't as big a deal as it used to be.
Dave has a question.
Well, just a comment, if I can. First of all, can you hear me okay? I'm in my car.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, good. First of all, Evan, great job on kind of painting a nice broad picture of the movement. I think it was really excellent. And what I've been thinking about a lot, and it sort of relates to several of the questions that have been coming up about how to reach out to people on the other side, whether they're conservative, Republicans, or whatever. And also, what is our goal as humanists, right? The humanist associations, we've got San Diego, Orange County, Santa Barbara, the three main humanist associations in Southern Cal, all part of this SoCal secular movement or secular coalition. And, what really should our goal be, in my mind, is to live out our humanist values, which means really focusing on the issues in our backyard. I mean, yes, we can think about broad issues, national issues, global issues, but those are harder to impact. What we can all impact are things going on in our backyards, in our communities. And I do feel like if we focus and are able to really get our groups to focus more on the specific needs and issues in our communities and get involved in helping solve those issues, that's a next step of where we need to go just as humanist groups. But also in that process, I do think it's part of how we bring together some of the divides, because a lot of folks are going to agree on what the problems are. They may not agree on solutions all the time, but at least it's a better platform to start having discussions, whether it's, what are the top issues we've got going on? We've all got homelessness issues. We've all got, hunger issues and the need for taking care of folks that are marginalized and underrepresented. We've got, job issues and affordable housing. There's a huge list of issues. And it just, I would just encourage us all to, as we get more focused on the issues, that I think, we can have a bigger impact, and then also kind of reach across the aisle. That brings us into the interfaith groups, that brings us into all these other groups just naturally. So.
And a point off of that, and why I really, this is something I've been hooked on for about 2 years now, is I really want people to think about these things in movements, is you stop prioritizing the idea that there's any one way to do anything. There's no perfect model. It's got to be organic, and we're going to try some things, and we're going to fail some things, then we're going to learn from those things, or someone else is going to have a competing idea, and that's a good thing. Like, I really like Dave's point that, like, what you do is you try one way to do it, and if other people disagree, if they really believe that they have a better way to do it, I hope they go try to do that. We're going to find out who's doing it better, or if they work or not, or they're both going to succeed, which would be so fascinating. This idea, though, that we have to like slam all our organizations together because they're the same, or that, there's one perfect way and you've magically figured it out in your corner of the world. Like, that's almost never true. But if you support a larger movement of a bunch of entrepreneurs and professionals and followers and investors, and they're trying different things constantly, and you look at that in a 20 or 30-year period, you can see some really beautiful things usually come out of it. And the failures of those organizations is not the failure of a movement. That's the success of a movement. That is us learning and adapting and having the best organizations and leaders ideally continuing on. Is it perfect? No. Have you ever heard of a perfect social movement? But I guarantee with our worldview, we have one of the best shots to have one of the most impactful movements. Our commitment to evidence-based ideas, our commitment to always updating based on the best information, our commitment to not let faith and other logical fallacies get in the way. Again, we're not perfect. We're humans. We're monkeys in shoes, but we have a better shot. And so that's why I love this. I think, Dave and I and Jason, we all work in different places, and we have slightly different organizations, and we're trying different brands. We're communicating to different people, but that's a good thing. I could picture Jason setting up his organization right next to mine, and we could serve two different people and different needs that they have. And that is beautiful, because there's no one organization that can do it all.
Well, that's the same like churches. How many First Baptist churches? What about the Second Baptist Church? I never seen the Second Baptist Church. But
and that's funny. I got a question in the chat that was like, where do you see Atheists United in 10 years? Which I'll answer more specifically in a second. But I do think when I look at the movement 10 to 100 years from now, people get really scared when they think about it being hundreds or thousands of organizations. And I get really excited by that. I don't think that makes us less meaningful or beautiful or powerful. I think that means we're probably serving people's needs more specifically, more locally, more based on their identities and their backgrounds, more based on the needs and urges they have as human beings. Does that mean we need all of them from a resource perspective? Probably not. But in some ways, a grassroots movement is way more successful than a top-down movement. I would so prefer the Protestant Reformation to the Catholic Church if I had to pick one. And I think we will have more fulfilled people, and we will have a better world if we allow for that, rather than shout down everyone who tries to start something new. Now, being more specific about Atheists United, I have a few dreams and passions that I hope this organization could head towards. One is, I think, while we're a little bit more of an umbrella organization than some other nonprofits in the secular community, we have traditionally always been really successful at community and education programs. We have offered a fourth Sunday speaker since the 80s, and we have offered a network of meetups that support people based on their needs and affinities, and met them there at that space. We cannot and should not change that about the organization, and I want that to continue to thrive and grow. But I think we need to get better at the part of our mission and invest in the part of our mission that is more activism focused, which is actually changing society and culture so that atheists are more equal, so that government is more secular, and that all people can be free of religious privilege. And in order to do that, we need to do a few things. First, we need to impact media. We have to get much more public and publicity. We have to do ads. We have to do billboards. We got to be where people can see us. Second is we have to get organized politically. We have to take all of those people in all of those meetups and give them opportunities for political change. We need to bring them to Sacramento. We need to bring them to City Hall. We need to do letter writing campaigns. We need to give them and empower them to make a change. And then third, I think we need to professionalize that change, which is having either organizations or professionals that we invest in that kick ass at making that change. So I think we need lobbyists. I think we need coalitions that can go to Sacramento and instead of fight back religious laws, can pass secular community laws. So I think when you put those three together, my dream of where Atheists United goes is we expand what we're doing locally and the communities we offer. I'm picturing a network of atheist communities or similar organizations across California. And then I expect a wing of us that is invested heavily in media and politics.
So one quick question: with the large amount of meetings that you have and the dispersion of the satellite organizations for Atheists United, is it strictly atheists and humanists who attend, or do you also draw friendly religious people that want to interact because they like you and they like what you're doing? They might have a different perspective.
Yeah.
But outside of atheists, do you also draw in religious people?
Yes, not many. I mean, we know our target audience pretty well, and that's definitely who we serve. But yeah, my favorite example is our community choir. We have a member who's atheist who joined that, and her husband started to attend, who's a practicing Catholic, and has been featured in a few media stories they've done about our choir, Voices of Reason. We do get a lot of people exploring religious identities and ideas. We get students that are interested in what atheism means and how it's organized. And I think the more we actually have groups that can address people's other needs, we have the founder of our knitting group on this call. That is a hobby and a need that people really identify with. And I would imagine that if a religious person was excited to try a new community group, they would welcome them with open arms without compromising that it is an atheist space. So for us, we create an atheist space for atheist people, but all are welcome. We find that mostly serves atheists at the moment, but yeah, of course, we're open to all. So yeah.
In our group, occasionally we have religious friends who pop in, who find us interesting. And we have, even though we don't agree on the God concept, the fact of the matter is we can be insular and we could talk amongst ourselves, but it's having the loyal opposition, as it were, to show up from time to time to keep us honest. Because sometimes when we say this only behind someone's back, well, what's it like if that person decides to show up? For example, one of our religious friends who's being uncharacteristically quiet today, Keith, is on the line. It's always wonderful when Keith is here. Hi, Keith. How are you?
You're
I'm good. How you doing?
See
I
you.
seem to be more of a talk than a open discussion. That's mainly the reason. But yeah, I do appreciate you guys welcoming me all the time. Not all atheist groups are as welcoming. There's a spectrum.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, and it's worth talking about that in the diversity of a movement. A lot of, at least members in our community, and each community is different. We have a lot of people that are recovering from religion. They have friends and family who actively won't talk to them, or who want to pass laws that would hurt them or shame them based on their new identity. And so they don't feel comfortable in spaces with religious people, and haven't learned how to communicate diplomatically with those, or aren't interested in diplomatically. And in some cases, that's in response to trauma that they've faced. And in some cases, it's the culture that has been created either in atheist media or our groups. And so without forgiving, I think, some of the hate and backlash that I do think atheist communities have been responsible towards religious at times, there is, I think, a critical need for marginalized groups to have space that is safe and separate from who they believe or feel have traditionally been part of their oppressors. So yeah, I'm glad this is a welcoming space for religious, and I usually host similar. A quick story, my secular student group in college, my favorite member was a woman who wanted to be a Lutheran pastor. That was her like passion in life. She was in the religious studies program. She was a senior, and she basically got fed up that her religious classes and her religious friends like didn't ask deep enough questions. They were like, you stopped thinking. You liked following the pastor and you read the book a few times, but like, I have deeper questions and you won't engage them with deep answers. And she found the only place she could get that was the Secular Student Alliance on campus. And she became our most active member. And she is a Lutheran pastor to this day. I visited her in Northern California recently, and I love that. She has built a better bond and connection with us because she identified with the curiosity of our community, even though the identity was separate. So there are places and times where we can and should organize more around values that I think completely overlap with our religious counterparts, but occasionally we have spaces that are identity focused based on experience. So I'm glad and excited you're here, Keith, and this is a welcoming space.
Thank you. I get that. I don't, and Christianity has a culture of forgiveness, so it's not really a big deal. So that's cool. I get it. People have been persecuted. I wish that didn't happen because it's not part of the manual, so to speak, but it has definitely happened. And over history, so many people claim to be Christians have done so many horrible, horrible things. Mm-hmm. But it's not our culture to do so.
It seems like the identities we have and the books and leaders we follow doesn't seem to change the fact that there's always a few terrible people that will do a few terrible things. So there's no identity that escapes that.
Hey, can I just make one comment on was it Kevin that's joining us from
Keith.
the Keith? Sorry, Keith. Yeah, no, I've met you a couple of times. I've seen you on calls, and I'm sure, like most folks here, really appreciate your being here. I think it's really helpful for our community it encourages us to stay open and not get arrogant or closed-minded about things, and also to keep an open mind and to listen, which is so important. So thank you for doing that. And, one thing that's been pretty cool up our way in Orange County has been, we formed a book club called a Social Justice Book Club with several churches. So the Human Association is a part of it, our United Nations group is part of it, but there are several churches. Some are Unitarian Universalists, which, for the most part, kind of align on the humanist side of things, but others are other just progressive churches, if you will. And then there's a group of evangelicals that have formed, and Jeremy's on the call, and he attends their groups. We've all got our own group meetings, but they have been, as they describe themselves, on the bubble in terms of wanting to kind of break out their group of friends or evangelicals to get more engaged in issues like social justice. So they're looking to sort of, bust out into that. And it's been a really cool experience. And I don't know if Jeremy wants to comment at all just on that piece, but it's certainly been a good bridge builder, I think, to help open better discussion. And it's an easy thing to do, forming, book clubs around topics like this that really cross these divides.
I do want to comment on it. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Keith, the big thing for me is being able to get past fear. I think a lot of people in our society are very, very focused on fear of different, fear of other. And once you get past fear, you can embrace. I find it's easy to embrace people of different cultures because I'm not fearful that, oh, something's going to happen to me, or I'm going to lose my identity, or I'm going to be poisoned. I mean, I'm just throwing out terms, but the fact is, I think one has a sense of security in and of themselves. You're more welcoming of people and their views because you realize their views aren't going to corrupt me or hurt me or change me. I still have my value system. I mean, I appreciate you being here very much, Keith, in that you give us the overall understanding that the difference is not the big thing. We have more in common than we have in different.
Thank you very much. I definitely am a fan of bridge building, by the way.
Okay, I'll have one question. Can you hear me? Or actually 2 questions. So first off, I noticed that Roku, they used to have an atheist site on there, but then they have all kinds of churches, all kinds of other religious organizations, but nothing to do with atheism. And it seems like a good forum. They have, the apps on that and would be a good place to get exposure for this organization and other atheist groups. I was wondering why they didn't take advantage of that. I guess that'd be my first question.
That was organized by American Atheists, I want to say like 6 years ago or so. And I heard some critiques of it at the time as it really didn't have content beyond a few conferences and a few lectures that were on YouTube. My understanding is the amount of time it took to keep it active, and I forget if there was some cost associated with it or not, ultimately led to it not being a important and valuable program for them, American Atheists, and they let it go. Definitely opportunity for others to do it. We've got some other, hopefully lower cost, higher reward ideas we're focused on. But you're right, that is a media opportunity for someone.
Okay, so another thing, so I'm in the memoir and novel writing class, and I wrote about like a little memoir on the Holocaust. I call it the Holocaust and the Holocaust, kind of exploring how, Jews have, compared to other religions, a very high percentage of people who are not religious. And I think the Holocaust has a lot to do with that. So I'd like to kind of find a market for my little story, if you know of a good place. Or
yeah, there's a lot of secular Jewish humanist communities around the country worth checking out. There's 2 national ones, and then there's a local one in San Diego that I think recently just spoke to Jason's group, and then we've got one up in LA. But yeah, I would recommend, if I could, try to build a relationship with them before trying to sell or pitch them something. As a leader of a community, I will say I get a lot of solicitation, and it's not wanted, but if you're a friend, we'll take it.
Okay, good idea. Thank you. Okay, so that's it.
Great, thank you.
So Dr. Jim.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed this lecture, and the comments I have is about, I agree on language is a key, and education. And one of the problems we're having is imprecise language. Several words mean the same thing, and we're not communicating. And so that's part of it, getting the words correctly, the right language, and with the scientific thinking, one word means one thing. So you don't have a miscommunication. And Jason has had a program of and a book on logical fallacies.
Sure.
We're studying logical fallacies, or having a program on it. And I started studying up on this because I've noticed a lot of people are, when you have discussions, they're using all kinds of logical fallacies, and they're using the ad hominem deal all the time, where they call people names. It has nothing to do with the argument. And so if people can understand what the logical fallacies are, and you point it out to somebody losing a logical fallacy, but you're not beating them down and yelling at them for using one, you're trying to communicate you are making a logical fallacy. Maybe, you know, you got to understand what it is and whatever. So that's one thing about language and how to communicate. And so that's a problem. Why people don't.
Yes, and so there's definitely a need, especially in arguments and philosophical conversations, to have agreement of language, right? Otherwise, you're going to talk past each other.
Right.
I think there's a second question about language, which is more political in nature, which is what mobilizes and makes change, which is often less perfect language. So, for instance, the anti-abortion, anti-woman, I would argue, community uses pro-life as language to mobilize around, even though we might have varied definitions about what pro-life means. They have claimed that in the political sphere in a way that they're able to mobilize around, and like I say me, who identifies more humanist and liberal, does not identify around. Or even the concept of theory has been really well organized around in the anti-evolution space as a critique of the scientific definition of the scientific idea of theory. And so politically, you're speaking past each other because you don't have the time to argue. Like, we're not going to sit down and go face to face and like agree on logical fallacies and agree on definitions. And so, yes, in daily conversations and philosophical and personal conversations and argumentation, that's really important. But politically, you don't have time to argue and get on the same page with language. And often what is more important, I've found, is focusing on what is engaging and brings people together, even if imperfect. And this is a challenge, and it is a frustration. As a rationalist, I also get frustrated by this as well. But movements are not built on perfect language all the time. They're built on the language that inspires people to come together. And while we will continue to improve that language, and should, I don't actually think there ever will be perfect language in a social movement.
Okay, comment. It's possible to educate people to think logically. Like the comment you said that the libertarians, the whole group of them, you're against because they were against child, whatever it was, but they aren't thinking logically. They are you can disagree with what they're saying.
Right.
In your group, and you can tell them why they're making a mistake because they're not thinking logically, and you can convince them without force. Hey, you're thinking illogically. There's a better way to handle the kids or any other problem. There's a better way.
Yeah.
You said that, and I agree. There's more than one way of thinking, but theoretically, there's a better way. One way is best of all the ways. And what is that? You have to find out what it is. And so, if I heard
that's a resource question, isn't it? So where and how you put your time as somebody that wants change in the world. And so, yes, I know that there are plenty of examples of people who have educated themselves out of fallacies, right? Like, they have learned that something was mathematically and technically and logically wrong, and they have updated based on that information. I have also found people who will think that way about questions maybe about God or science, won't think that way about other things and can easily be persuaded in times of trauma, in times of intensity, in times of tension. And so really, yes, I can, in a perfect world, logically convince people who have bad ideas to change their mind in a lot of cases, but I don't have the time or energy, and like, will they give me that time and energy in response for us to have those conversations? Or is it better to like focus more politically to just protect everyone rather than have every conversation? So I'm in some ways, what I'm saying is I'm having a political conversation, and I think you're having a rationality conversation. And while we agree on rationality, I think it often is a not very effective political strategy.
Okay. Are you thinking short term or are you thinking long term? Because it takes a long time, difficult time to get people to think rationally. Agreed. But there is
I would almost argue that you can't get anyone to think rationally all the time.
Okay, agree. Nobody
so,
all
yeah,
the time, but
right.
they can think the majority of the time. And they're, you know, you ask if I heard of a better way of social intercourse, the science of social science. It's a science that man hasn't developed, but there are people that spend a lot of time doing this. And one guy is Andrew J. Galambos. He's got a lot of crazy ideas, but he was a mathematician. He had, 40,000 graduates, became libertarians, and he planted the seed of thinking like a mathematician, and it's still growing. That's something you might explore. You don't have to believe it. It's a long term, and
that's okay. No. If I wanted to be pitched on this stuff, I would have signed up for it. So I guess I'll send you some books too.
So I have a question. I have a question for everyone on the chat right now, including Evan, and especially for those who have been a little more quiet during this. My question for everyone is, what are the primary one or two reasons, since we're talking about the movement, what are the primary one or couple of reasons that you're involved in the group that you're involved in? You could say something like, because I want the social connections, because I want to make a difference, because I feel like it's being part of something bigger and more important than myself. So I'd just like to go down the list, and if you'd like to offer an answer, I would greatly appreciate that, because we're talking about movements, and it's great to understand when we're talking about movements, the most important part of the movement, which is every individual member. So you've gone over this wonderful presentation, Evan, but in short, why are you part of the movement, and why are you part of the group that you're involved in?
I think that's a great question. I believe this is the place I can make the most positive change in people's life in society right now. And I've found that has evolved over time. Like, it is not convincing people to not believe in God or not. Honestly, that's becomes a less and less meaningful question in my life, whether God exists or not. I find that the values we organize around, and whether we have communities to organize in those spaces, and whether those spaces are organized to where they could make political impact, is more my theory of how change happens in the world. And so I desperately want there to be successful community alternatives for those that don't identify as religious, which now is 1/3 of my generation and younger. And I don't think it's ethical for them to have no option. And I think it's actually critical if we're going to change things like climate change, like reproductive rights, like even Black Lives Matter, that we be a part of that conversation. We put our worldview at the table. So that's it for me. I see. Yeah, I love having conversations about philosophy and religion, and can do it as long as anyone probably on this call can. But I get really excited to see change in the world that impacts people's lives, and I think we are we're building a space and a community and a movement that can and will do that for generations to come.
And Christina, why are you part of our group and why are you part of the movement? You might not consider yourself part of the movement, so if I ask this question, why are you part of the group? What appeals to you about being part of a humanist or atheist group? Christina.
Thank you. For me, I've always felt called to these ideas, and I awakened to it through feminism at a really young age, and then just feeling like in my small community of like really sweet Lutheran people that I just didn't have like, and I'm going to echo some earlier sentiments, a safe space to be myself and to discuss things that were important to me. And particularly, I feel really called to social justice. So this group, I just found this group over the pandemic, and it's been, I think, just a way to find communion with other like-minded individuals who are committed to a better world.
Thank you. And Ray, why are you part of the humanist community?
Hi, Ray here. I'm part of the humanist community because I believe in something better, and I believe in civil rights, and I believe this is a community that also believes in civil rights. So I think, you know, to have an outlet for that is nice and important. And I think humanism is a great way to build a community.
Thank you. And Mike Lewis, you and I have been involved with humanism and atheism for 2 decades, 40 years together. Why are you part of the humanist community?
I retired from the Orange County Fire Department in 1995, and shortly thereafter, I live in Vista, California, and I got a catalog for Vista Adult Education, and I just perused it, and I saw a course titled Parapsychology and Beyond. And I thought, oh, they must warn people about the fact that there's no supernatural, that parapsychology is quack science, if you want to call it that, and stuff. So I was curious about the class, and I took it, and the instructor said that he'd been teaching this class at Vista schools for 9 years together with his wife, and they were going to inform us on things as telekinesis, teleportation, raising objects, and just all kinds of paranormal stuff. And so the next class, the second class, and there were people from, you know, elderly people to people just getting out of high school. And so for the second class, I came prepared with scientific articles, magazines, and I presented to the teacher at the beginning of the class, I would like to just discuss the topics of his class and the titles of articles that I brought in, and just their authors and their academic credentials that refuted everything in the class. So ultimately, I got tossed out of the class. The teacher, I'm a recovering ex-Catholic, he said he noticed that I might, you know, benefit from speaking to a friend of his who was a Catholic priest. So I got distraught, and in a atheist, American Atheist magazine, I believe I found the Humanist Association of San Diego, or I mean not the Humanist, the San Diego Association of Rational Inquiry, SIDARI, joined them, and through them, just looking for rational people to discuss the supernatural and how I was treated and humiliated in the class. The teacher told me I could not discuss the magazines I brought in. I couldn't present anything. And so anyway, after writing a couple of letters to the editor, I got that class canceled. And the teacher was just trying to dumb down our community to make clients for paranormal quacks, palm readers and such. And so anyway, discovering the humanists, I felt among like-minded people. And being raised Catholic, I was raised racist, sexist, and homophobic. And after becoming acquainted with the humanists, I got over all that. And one minor question for our guest is, whenever I go to a city council meeting, I have to endure the "In God We Trust" plaque. It disrespects anyone who isn't a Christian, basically, because they don't believe in any God but the Jesus, Holy Ghost God. And then we have to say the pledge with God in it. And when I go to a Democratic Club meeting in Carlsbad, Oceanside, we say the pledge under God. We're at such a disadvantage. How can you have dialogue with people who would have you burn in hell when the gospel, according to Mark chapter 16, verse 16, Jesus doesn't say, join the Christian church and get the benefit of heaven. He says, join the church or your ass is going to fry forever. I won't let you die. He says, he who believeth not shall be damned. So I wonder what use it is to even discuss these topics with Christians. So anyway, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I think honestly, if there's any group to discuss the "In God We Trust" with, is probably Christians. Politically, it's just speaking on the political side for a second, it's really, really hard and a long shot to get changed at this point. You probably know the history of it coming about during the Cold War and how it was added during that time in response to, fear of the communists. But yeah, I think for us and for most of our culture, a lot of phrases like that have become secular in nature. Obviously, they're not for many in our community and they're not for many on the far right. But I think generally the way it's talked about by most politicians and its society at large, it's kind of like when I say Jesus Christ when I stub my toe, like nobody thinks I'm actually talking about like a really religious concept in that sense. Now, I do think I would love for it to change, but thinking about political priorities also, because it's such a long shot and because it is so symbolic compared to things like children dying of faith healing still in the United States every year, we have, I think, both a moral imperative and a political imperative to take on other issues first. So while I do hope eventually we can return to a more secular, inclusive, and pluralistic motto for the country, I actually think our community from a political strategy perspective has not helped itself by making that one of the loudest things we talk about in some corners of our community over the past 40 years, when we could be talking about faith healing. We could be talking about prejudice in schools towards secular children. We could be talking about more, like Muslim ban policies and how that's chipping away at the separation of church and state. Like there's other priorities ethically and politically. But you're right. You're absolutely right. I hate it too. One of my favorite things to do is in Arizona. Every year, the Secular Coalition for Arizona organizes a big lobby day. They usually get like 100 to 200 people to show up. And we sit in the gallery of the House of Representatives as they do their opening, convocation prayer. And then they also do their opening Pledge of Allegiance. And the atheists and humanists in attendance, usually we say it really loud. We're like, I pledge allegiance to the flag. And then the "In God" part, we're just all silent on. And so you can like hear the silence suddenly because we were talking so loud, and it's got this like weird cultural moment where like we love it and it kind of like shocks some religious people, like what just happened. But in the big scheme of things, like if I had to choose tomorrow, I would prefer like we had secular recovery programs for everyone, then we changed the pledge. But I do want the pledge to change.
Yeah, well, thank you. And one when it comes to under God and the pledge, I just holler, no. And I've never had anybody tell me not to do that.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
okay, so a few
Thank
other
you, Evan.
questions. A few other questions. Jeremy, why are you part of the humanist community?
Just to paraphrase it easy, I started off life getting a lot of discrimination sent my way for having a disability or being a different religion or whatever you want to call it. And to borrow from what Christina said, I got a real good idea from probably about 4 years of age that I wanted to be involved with social justice. And so not only did I start teaching disabled children and then teaching people how to teach disabled children, but I figured out at a very early age that social justice is so important. And I didn't find that I was getting that through any other formula, any other organization. And so it was important for me not just to be around like-minded people, because the energy is what it was. Is for me, I'm a highly empathic person. I deal with children, so I really kind of have to read them and know what their energy is. And I'm very sensitive when I'm around people who have that negative kind of, just they don't want you there kind of feeling. So I always attract to places and people that have that good energy. And I had to do something for my life and for the rest of my life that deals with social justice. So all of these different organizations always help to fulfill that void, but also make me feel that at least, I'm contributing something positive. Especially, Bradley brought it up about, him wanting to do something regarding the Holocaust, and my parents actually survived the Holocaust. So for me, it's more about, you don't have a choice at this point in life. You have to be an activist or there's something wrong with you.
Thank you. And then I guess I'll ask two more people and then we will wrap up. So
I have to run. I just wanted to say thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much for coming today, everyone. Give Evan a warm thank you. All right.
Have a good day.
As do I. I need to run as well.
Jeremy, thank you.
Thanks again.
So last couple questions. So Mickey, why are you part of the humanist community?
I got sober. I was a born again Christian. I got my degree in Christian theology from, I should have said this before he left, from APU, Zeus Pacific University, Zeus Pacific College, which kind of near where he was, Cal Lu. He knows AP because we were sports rivals. Anyway, I went through life thinking Jesus was on my shoulder, telling me what was right, and I turned out to be gay and embraced that, and still figured God would end up figuring some way to have a use for my life, and I would evangelize people and bring them to the Lord, and this was all going to fall into place at some point. And then I didn't know it, but I was already an alcoholic at the time, and I know that now, and picked up meth along the way, and at some point hit a crisis, and suddenly grew up and got sober. And in my early sobriety, I was exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous, which a lot of people say is a very Christianized program, but it's only Christianized after the fact. Its origins have plenty of room for atheists. There were a lot of atheists, or a number of influential atheists in the early formation, and that's why the term God as you perceive him is so prevalent. It is not God the way we perceive him, but God, in your own image. So and also they do have a chapter in their book which is terribly condescending, but it still is called We Agnostics. So in my early sobriety, I was exposed to these people, and my evangelical training and all the questions that I ran across when I was in theological school finally had an answer, because I started listening to the world around me and listening to atheists as a part of news and information, and they impressed me. They were fearless in their ability to say, we don't know, instead of making spurious claims as to their knowledge. And I admired that. Instead of saying BS, they told the truth. And so my my belief in a God took a sudden turn, and then there I was with without a community. I mean, I still had my alcoholics, but I wanted to find out more. And I went to this organization. But I also listened to, religiously listened to Freedom from Religion Foundation's weekly program too. And Atheist Experience too. Started tuning into that. But I liked the idea. This is my replacement for the supportive community that a church has, and it also is, has the tendrils that go up to legislation that the religious community has. So, ours are admittedly a lot thinner, and we're not choking out very many politicians like they do. But yeah, that's why I'm here. I want to be a part of a thing that represents the people that think like me, or at least don't think like I don't think. Put it that way. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments from today? Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Evan. Thank you for Christine. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. This was an impactful event, and I'm glad that we got together. Next week, we are talking about humanism and democracy. You can check us out on YouTube at our YouTube page. Please like and subscribe. And we will see you guys next week. And now we're going to have some social time. Thank you.